Hello, Avila Advantage students. We are now officially halfway through the course, so these courses do move quickly, so just stay on top of things and you'll do fine. But we have weeks 5 through 8 left, and this week is a little bit lighter week after your exam. So we have Chapter 12 we're going to look at, and it's a brief chapter. So you need to read Chapter 12, continue to work on My Econ Lab, and then also just participate in a weekly forum discussion. I think I'll have a fun one out there. I'm going to have you watch a video about a guy that lives in a very tiny house, and just this week the forum discussion can go any direction, but it does kind of tie into the chapter's material in Chapter 12 when they talk about the life cycle theory of consumption and also the permanent income hypothesis. You know, we have choices that we make about how we consume goods and services, and that may vary depending on our expectations about our future income levels, our disposable income, and what's important to us. So, do we want to spend a lot of money on a house? Do we want to spend a lot of money on eating out? For a lot of you right now, you're spending a lot of money on education, so you're taking out student loans. So you probably don't have the disposable income to pay for the education directly. So you actually kind of savings, but the hope or benefit is that in the future, you'll be able to consume more potentially by having a higher income, by having a college degree. But anyway, when we look at this Chapter 12 this week, it kind of starts in an individual basis, and they look at this idea of the difference between saving and savings. A saving is a cash flow, but a savings is kind of a period of time, how much you would accumulate. But they use a basic model of an individual and about the choices they make in consumption and savings. And they make some assumption, there's a permanent, maybe even autonomous level of consumption. Like in the textbook, they mentioned $12,000 a year. And if you had no disposable income, you would figure out a way to borrow that $12,000 in order to meet those basic expenditures. And, it would continue up to some point, and that's where they put it on the textbook, kind of on page 255, where they had that break-even line. Maybe at $60,000 income a year, it would be a break-even. And we'd keep the same consistent level of savings. They talk about the marginal propensity to save and the marginal propensity to consume. But then they talk about the average propensity to save and the average propensity to consume. And those can change as we move along the curve. It's probably at higher income levels, the average of the amount we would save would actually start to increase. And I think that's something that somebody that is at a higher income level can afford to do. And then average-wise, again, there's a difference between the marginal, which always stays consistent. So in their basic model on that page 255, they show planned real consumption per year versus real disposable income, that 45-degree line, that kind of a straight line that's kind of in between, is saying those two would be equal. But because we have some autonomous consumption at 12,000, it's just at that point that exactly at 60,000 that all the disposable income exactly equals the real planned consumption. So there's no savings or savings at that point. And what the reason they do this in this chapter is that they kind of carry this over to kind of a picture of the national economy. And going back to our aggregate expenditures approach, we said GDP was a function of consumption, investment, government expenditures, and the difference, and plus, exports minus imports. So usually that's a negative item with the exports minus imports for us in the United States, because we import a lot more than we export. But anyway, it's kind of saying, there's this, autonomous level of investment, or consumption, I should say, in the economy. And they kind of start off with that C line, just going straight across. And they said, okay, let's add in investment, and then let's add in government expenditures, the net export. And again, the idea in theory is now that we're kind of looking at the overall economy. And we look at on page 261, they have the idea of like real GDP per year, and then planned real consumption per year. And again, where the combination of all these lines would intersect would be an equilibrium in the economy. And if the economy was out of equilibrium, it could be, that perhaps businesses would have to cut back, if the amount of savings exceeded and they weren't consuming goods and services. Well, probably businesses and corporations would start to cut back on hiring, and they would stop to cut back on production to get it back in line with GDP. And the last part of this chapter looks at kind of a harbinger of things to come with fiscal policy, but it talks about the multiplier impact. And they show this, even at a base level of if there was no investment at all, we might be at 1 trillion, but if we kind of implemented 2 trillion of investment, we'd get up to 11 trillion. So that difference is about 10 trillion. So that must mean it's a multiplier of 5. So the idea of multiplier is that if someone goes out and spends $1 on a good or service, the person that receives that dollar would then save 20% of it, and they would consume 80 cents of it. So then that next would go to like 80 cents to the next person to buy something else, and they would repeat that process. And then they show that kind of as a diagram here. If we look on page 267, so it's saying what's the net impact. So with fiscal policy in theory, one of the things that it can do is like increase government spending or encourage investment to try to stimulate that shift upward, if you will, of the curve to increase equilibrium income in the economy. But that's something we'll discuss a little bit more. And then it ties into aggregate demand, but we'll discuss it more in the future about different ways that the government may increase government spending or decrease taxes to try to shift that aggregate demand curve out and try to get to the ideal equilibrium level of output. So, well, I want to tell you to have a great week, and then I'll just be looking forward to talking to you online this week's forum discussion. But if you do have any questions, do send me an email in Canvas, and have a great week. Take care.